Shalom, I'm recording this on June 5th in 2011. June 5th is the anniversary of the Six-Day War. It was fought between Israel and Egypt, Jordan, and Syria between June 5th and June 10th in 1967. Now, it seems like a long time ago. I was 11 years old at the time, but I still remember it vividly. My personal recollection was that I was attending a Jewish day school, an Orthodox day school on the south side of Chicago, and all we knew as kids that we were listening, there wasn't much class for that week. We were listening to Abdel Nasser, the dictator of Egypt, who kept threatening to drive the Jews into the sea, and it seemed like another Holocaust was coming. And then all we found out is that on June 4th, the Israeli government decided to go to war secretly. We found out that later. And on June 5th, they had a surprise attack. Basically, even though there were war preparations being made in the Arab countries, it seems like they surprised the Egyptian, Syrian, and Jordanian air forces with their planes out in full view and destroyed the air forces and the planes, and then they sent tanks in. And shortly thereafter, Israel captured the Sinai Desert and Gaza from Egypt. They captured the Golan Heights from Syria, although why anybody thinks it's Syrian property or that the Sinai actually belonged to Egypt. And they conquered the East Jerusalem from Jordan, who didn't have any right to have it. And they also conquered the West Bank from Jordan, even though Jordan didn't have any legal right to have that either. And so quickly and amazingly, and it seemed like miraculously, the Israelis had a complete, decisive, quick, lightning-fast victory, and not only capturing the Sinai and its oil wells and giving it more room, and the Gaza, which was a constant thorn in its side, having been able to exercise military control, in the West Bank, which lengthened its strategic depth from 9 miles to not even a great distance, but a more significant depth. Captured the Golan, which is a strategic height. I mean, for those who've been on the Golan, you know that you can stand up there and you can still go to the Syrian bunkers, which overlook the Israeli valleys below, and you can kind of pretend you're shooting these Syrian machine guns down at the farmers trying to farm in the valleys below. That's the critical nature of the... And they did nothing with it. Syria did nothing with the Golan. Now there's hundreds of thousands of Israelis. They're growing crops and all kinds of technology and really making great use of the land. But the most important thing, obviously, was the Western Wall, which had been in Jordanian hands and denied Jews access to our holiest site. And now, like a miracle, Jews were able to go back to the Western Wall, which was the foundation wall of the Great Holy Temple, and pray there. And it was an amazing time. There were so many Jews who reported feeling, who had been alienated from Jewish life, who didn't feel part of Jewish life, who suddenly felt part of jumped on the Israeli bandwagon and felt part of a victorious and decisive David against Goliath moment. But somehow in the intervening years, the story has been totally twisted so that this tiny little country, Israel, outnumbered by 300 to 1, and by hundreds of millions of miles of Arab land versus a tiny little country of Israel, is now the Goliath, and all those Arab countries are the David. How that happened is beyond me. Israel inherited, along with the West Bank, a refugee situation. Now, every other time there's been a refugee situation in the world, they've been absorbed by other populations. For example, I've said in other videos that 750,000 Jews were expelled from Arab countries between 1948 and 1950 when Israel was declared. And tiny little Israel, with only that amount of population to start with, doubled its population virtually overnight by absorbing all those refugees. So why the 300 million Arabs could not absorb 1 million Arab refugees in their countries, blood brothers, is beyond anybody's imagination, but they didn't. And so that's led to all kinds of conflicts, and it's clearly that the Arabs have kept the issues alive just to be a pain in Israel's side all these years. But it is a great day of celebration for freedom and for security. Now, Israel's made amazing concessions for peace. They did capture the Sinai from Egypt, but they returned the Sinai. They gave the Sinai back for a peace agreement with Egypt, which is now threatened because Mubarak is no longer in power, and it looks like, even though the army is currently in power, that the Muslim Brotherhood, a violent terrorist organization, may take over Egypt and nullify that treaty. But Israel did give back that treaty and the oil wells that were in the Sinai. And they unilaterally pulled out of Gaza a few years ago. So how can anybody call Gaza occupied now? It's completely under its own sovereignty. It was a good test case to see if, left to its own devices, the Palestinians could create a democratic nation, but instead all they've done is keep their people in terror, Hamas, and send missiles to kill innocent Israelis. So much for that hope. But we continue to pray for peace. Syria is in chaos right now. It's got a horrible dictator, Assad, but he might be overthrown. Who knows? He's brutally massacring the rebels against him, but who knows who will take his place. And the Kingdom of Jordan must be very nervous too, because it's mostly Palestinian and it's governing people against its will. It's got a peace treaty with Israel. So we'll see what happens there. But in any case, today we celebrate this great victory of Israel in 1967. After, as a little kid, being so frightened about the threats of Nasser, who was fully backed by the Soviet Union. It was one of those times when it was U.S. weapons behind Israel fighting Soviet weapons in Egypt and the other Arab countries. Decisive victory for American weaponry and decisive victory for this little plucky David fighting this giant Goliath, just trying to survive. So we celebrate today this victory of the democracy against tyranny, of the small against the mighty. And I'm sure in subsequent centuries, as we look back at this, the Jewish people and other freedom-fighting people will consider it a great miracle.